The second Federal Executive Council meeting held yesterday, and issues of the economy and the agreement reached between government and the labor unions were considered to avert an industrial action by labor. With the FEC meeting days now moved to Mondays instead of Wednesdays, adopted by the previous administrations, council members approved the 2024 to 2026 medium-term expenditure framework and fiscal strategy papers, setting new parameters ahead of the presentation to the National Assembly with a 26.01 trillion naira budget projection for the 2024 fiscal year. After a 6-week hiatus, the council meeting also approved an application for $1.5 billion in financing from the World Bank. State House correspondent Adesuwa Omorwan reports.
Ministers share greetings and engage in separate discussions as they gather 49 days after their previous meeting, marking the second meeting of the Federal Cabinet of the Bola Tinubu administration. The arrival of the president signifies the commencement of proceedings, but first, a formalization of the cabinet's expansion with the swearing in of 3 new ministers, taking the number of those in the Federal Executive Council from 45 to 48, setting a new record in the country's political history. During its closed-door session, economic matters took center stage with the approval of the 2024 to 2026 medium-term expenditure framework and fiscal strategy papers. The executive says the budget projection for 2024 stands at 26.01 trillion naira.
Assuming 73.96, oil production of 1.78 million barrels a day, exchange rate of 700, then the inflation of 21% and GDP growth rate of 3.76%. The aggregate expenditure is estimated at 26.01 trillion naira. It was presented on the background of the commendable measures that have been taken since June in order to restore macroeconomic stability, particularly the deregulation of petroleum prices, which we will maintain. Fuel subsidies are gone, and indeed the regulation of the foreign exchange market.
The Minister of Finance announced 2 significant financial approvals, emphasizing their necessity despite the administration's commitment to reducing reliance on borrowings.
Nigeria has been able to make the kind of macroeconomic moves, has been able to take the tough decisions to restore balance in the economy, in the government's finances, that has warranted support, that has gendered and that has elicited even support from the multilateral development banks, and is on the basis of that that the World Bank is willing to consider and to process on our behalf $1.5 billion of concessional financing, relatively cheap financing, and financing that will be disbursed relatively quickly. Secondly, an $80 million financing from the African Development Bank was also approved by the Federal Executive Council.
Also, the Council approved the establishment of the Presidential Council on Industrial Revitalization, along with 10 subcommittees chaired by the President, covering various aspects of commerce, trade, and industry.
At the end of this, we expect to see a boost in investment coming into the different industrial sectors. We see a boost in job creation and employment, and a general increase in our indices, especially our GDP growth rate, which we expect to be growing from 3.5, hopefully to 7%, and a GDP base of about 1 trillion, which is in line with Mr. President's vision.
Additionally, a committee to review free trade zones was sanctioned to enhance their economic benefits. The council also ratified an agreement between the government and labour unions setting a 30-day timeline for implementation, a decision approved by the Federal Executive Council. President Bola Tinubu has authorized a shift in the Federal Executive Council meetings from Wednesdays to Monday with a new on-demand scheduling, a departure from the weekly meetings held by the Federal Cabinet, presided by him or the Vice President. From the Presidential Villa, Adesoa Omoruan, Arise News.
Joining us now on the morning show as we take a look at the economic decisions taken by the Federal Executive Council at yesterday's meeting is Professor Ndubisi Nwokoma, a professor of financial economics and director of the Center for Economic Policy Analysis and Research at the University of Lagos. Good morning, Prof. Thank you for joining us again on the morning show.
Good morning. Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you for joining us. Well, Prof, yesterday, as we stated in the introduction, we now have the medium-term expenditure framework and fiscal strategy. The government says they're going to retain the January to December cycle and keep to it. They are proposing a budget of 26 trillion naira. They are securitizing ways and means, reducing it to about 9%. They are going to borrow money, $15 billion from the World Bank, and an additional $1.5 billion from World Bank, and an additional $8 million AFDB loan, which they say is for the Ekiti knowledge zone. I don't know why it has to be Ekiti and not Anambra. I bet you know the details, Prof. What's your assessment? We're borrowing more and we're spending more on debt service. That's the effect of the securitization of ways and means that they are proposing.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Thank you for having me once again. I think what we can do now is just to comment on the decisions taken by the Federal Executive Council meeting that held yesterday on these various economic issues. First and foremost, I think the budget size of 26 trillion, in my view, it's appropriate in the sense that government now has more money. When people are crying that there's no money, there's money, but the money has been transferred from private hands to government hands, because when government was paying for fuel subsidy before, the people were, let's say, enjoying some of the benefit, but now the money has been transferred. So government is richer. So they have much more money to be able to invest in the economy. So the size of the budget, it's can be understandable, not only for the issue of fuel subsidy, also in terms of the exchange rate, because the benchmark rate is now about 700 naira, which was about 461 for this year's this year's budget. So you can see that government has more money to spend. So by increasing the size of the budget from about 21 trillion to 26 trillion, I think it's quite understandable. That's the first point. The second point is that I have looked at all the projections made for the budget. You know, a budget is as good as its projections. It's as good because the document is just a plan. And what you have now is not actually a plan. It's actually a proposal on what will drive the plan, which is here to be taken to the National Assembly. And just to take a look at these proposals, the assumptions, just one after the other. Government is planning to have debt service increased to about 8.25 trillion, which in my view is, it tells you the direction of government. They want to actually pay off the debt, but they are borrowing more. We are borrowing about 1.5 from the World Bank, IDA debt, which is concessionary. But you are spending so much money on debt service, which tells you that government is trying to get out of the trap which they have found themselves. Also, like we said earlier, the ways and means trap. And then the other issue we should look at is the benchmark price for for crude, $73.96. In my view, that looks reasonable because the global oil market may actually give you more than that, given what is happening in Gaza and Israel and Ukraine and Russia. So you can see that the global market is actually unstable. So the price of oil may actually go more than 73. So in my view, that appears realistic. The 700 naira to $1 exchange rate projection, well, neither here nor there because the markets have not been stable. Unless government is able to work on supply, that rate may actually be like a dream. So if you take a look at all the projections, inflation 21%. When we have the last report, it's about 26% for inflation. So they have to really work hard because if you look at the inflation we have, they are largely cost push. And also due to the exchange rate, which they need to actually work on. So that inflation figure, I have my reservations about that, but it is not too far from what I think it ought to be. Then finally, the other point, well, two other issues I want to comment on very quickly is the oil production level of about 1.78 million barrels per day. Oil theft has to be addressed. The OPEC quota, those two will drive that. And I don't know to what extent we can meet that because that projection, because that will drive the level of revenue you are going to have for the period. And then finally, the GDP growth rate, 3.76%. It's on the high side because we are talking about 2.5 second quarter of this year, 2.5% year on year. So I think it's the government has to really tell us where the growth will come from. Is it agriculture that is still trying to stabilize? Is it manufacturing that is battling with exchange rate? Where will the growth come from? So these are the general comments before we can now go into details on the on yesterday's meeting I held in Abuja.
Nwokoma, for giving us a broad overview of the details of yesterday's FEC meeting. One of the things I'd like to mention is that the $1.5 billion secured from the World Bank is said to be interest-free. According to a statement released after the meeting, I'd like you to speak to the significance of that because, of course, one of the things that we talk about when it talks about securing even more loans is our repayment. And beyond the repayment, the interest rates on it, high interest rates and the likes. What's the significance of that in breaking that down? Then the second part of it is the talk about a supplementary budget and the fact that they were, Senator Bagudu had talked about there will be a supplementary budget to meet some of the expenses that have occurred since this particular government took office. But there's been a criticism around that because in the last few weeks, with the expenses, whether it's a response to humanitarian crisis, different ministries bringing one budget or the other, and the question had been, where is the budgetary provision for that? Is this an announcement putting the cart before the horse, or is this still within reason in terms of the monies that have been allocated or earmarked for different projects without a supplementary budget?
Okay, thank you very much. The first question about the new loan, which the government is trying to, zero interest free, which is basically concessional from the World Bank, the low interest window of the World Bank, the IDA loan. And in my view, government may be trying to shore up the exchange rate because by the time you pump in money into the system, it will also affect supply for foreign exchange. When you bring in about $1.5 billion from the World Bank, it helps to shore up your exchange rate. But the government had made a commitment earlier in the year of not to get involved in procuring new loans. So I guess there must be some kind of fire on the mountain for government to think of and tell us that it is zero interest on the facility. So government needs to be cautious. And I think if we are going to talk of getting out of this debt trap, because we're in a debt trap currently, we have about 87 trillion naira debt on the country. And as at now, we are talking about 90% and more debt service to revenue ratio. So actually, the country is actually over-leveraged, in my view. So if taking more loans and telling us that it is zero interest on it, it's trying to eat your cake and still have it, because there was that commitment. So in my view, well, the law will help us to shop our exchange rate. That is basically because more money will come in foreign currency. It will help the FX market, depending on how it is managed, so that until government cannot pick up its feet to be able to address other macroeconomic issues. So to that extent, I can say there's some value in that facility, the low interest and also the exchange rate consequences. The other issue about supplementary budget, in my view, it would be premature for government to be talking about supplementary budget now. That tends to suggest that they can see gaps in the current proposal. Because if there are no gaps that you are seeing, there's nothing like at the beginning telling us that there will be supplementary budget, which means you have not factored in everything you think you should factor in. So telling us ahead of time that I may do a supplementary budget, it tends to indict yourself about not doing a very thorough job before you now try to take decisions on those critical macro issues. So maybe by the time the document is ready and they present it to the National Assembly, they can fill up these gaps and then present something that will be more like a closely planned document that will only accommodate supplementary budget when something significant happens in the economy. And not that before you start, you are talking about supplementary budget. So that, I think, in my view, is premature for them to talk about that at this stage when they're just talking about decision-making on the projections.
Okay, sir. Sir, Prof, you keep saying we have money. Is that not an illusion when you say we have money in Nigeria? Because let me break it down for you, Prof, based on the analysis. This budget is 26 trillion. You know how much that is in dollars if you divide it by 1,000, over 1,000 that we're exchanging for the dollars today? It's just $26 billion. Our budget last year was 21 trillion. If you divide it by the rates we had, about 600, 650, 700, thereabout, it's about $30 billion. So the budget last year, in terms of real terms of money, is more than what we have now because we have devalued our currency. So when we keep saying we have money, Prof, as first, the question is that not an illusion? Is that not deceit? Because we are in dire straits as we speak. That's number one. Number two, I'd like to bring forward the case of the securitization of ways and means that's now adding to the money. Is that not about breaking the law? Because there's no law that supports securitization of ways and means. Now, the government is carrying that on their books at 9% interest rate. Not the principal, the interest rate. And that money goes to the CBN. They keep lapping it up. So what kind of economics or accounting are we doing? Last year, we had a budget deficit in the high trillion numbers. This year, we're having another deficit. Last year, we didn't make up to 6 trillion in revenue. In 2021, we even did better. We did about 6.1 trillion in revenue. The revenue prospects look bleak as we speak. How are we going to be able to carry it on with this humongous, budget that we have in Naira terms that is already devalued? And the last piece of my question, Prof, will be the fact that our subsidies not being paid again. Subsidies have returned, though. Because we keep saying, no, they've stopped paying subsidies. But subsidies are back as we speak. And the government sees on their fact books.
Okay, thank you very much. On the first issue about not having money, government has money in Naira terms. That's why I talk about the exchange rates harmonization. So we have money in Naira terms. So if you look at it in terms of Naira, the quantum of Naira available to government, because for every dollar, you are talking about 700 Naira. Last year, for every dollar, you're talking about 461. So that is where I mean by you have money. If you now talk about in dollar terms, it's a different picture. We are discussing Naira in this engagement. So basically, government has more money. If you now talk about Naira, so for every dollar you sell, you earn from oil, you have more Naira available to you than before. Because of the policy, try to harmonize the exchange rate, to unify the rate. So the rate moved from 461 to 700 and 750 or thereabouts, or 770 currently. But even though government is trying to bring it down to 700 for the budget, so we have money from that point of view. not in real terms, but in nominal terms. So that's basically to explain the we have money issue. So if you jack up your budget from 21 in naira, 21 trillion to 26 trillion in naira, then that's why. So that can be justified. But if you now begin to deflate, seeing it from two perspectives. One, from the exchange rate, remove the exchange rate effect and use dollar. That's a different picture. If you now use inflation, you now deflate, you now talk about what actually is the value of the money, is a different picture. But as the figures stand, Nigeria has more naira available. And it was purely a transfer from households and firms to the public sector, basically because of what you were paying before for them in terms of the subsidy and all that is now back to government. So government has more money than it has. It has helped to shore up public finance. That basically is on that issue. Then on the ways and means, it's really sad that Nigeria actually went haywire under the last administration in terms of management of the ways and means. Government, the central bank gave more loans than allowed by the CBN Act to the fiscal authorities. So more money was given, and that was a breach of the CBN Act. And now, what they are trying to do now is like a damage control situation. Now, it is no longer 5% of your last year's revenue. It is now 15%. So basically, a lot has been done to do a kind of damage control. Yes, there may be no legal justification. But in my view, if government has now come to realize that what they did in the past was wrong, and they want to find an escape route, how to come out of it, and get it securitized, and then to pay at 9%. So it's like trying to get out of a bad situation. So in my view, the step taken by government may be a little bit justified to that extent. But if you look at it from the legal perspective, you can see some loopholes here and there. That is my take on that. On the other issue you raised about we are now having a return of subsidies back to the economy. Yes, but you can also observe that there has been an increase in the price of PMS, in the pump price of PMS in the past 1 or 2 months, which means that the government has been transferring the price change to the public. And also there may be more increases because with all this crisis in Gaza and in Ukraine continuing, the price of crude will go up. And the more it goes up, the more you bring in subsidies, because government will now have to take the difference or transfer that difference to the consumer, which means the price of PMS will still keep on going on higher. If we want it to stay the way it is, then that is where we government will now come in and bridge the gap and take the subsidy. So it's like we must make up our minds whether we want government to take some bit of the subsidy or not. But the Tinubu administration has said that subsidy is gone. In my view, subsidy should actually go totally. So that when there's an increase in price of crude globally, it will affect the local price of PMS. And we should be able to accommodate that, provided government is able to invest in infrastructure and invest in the economy. And we can see a change in the macroeconomic fundamentals. Then we can now, as we are paying more, you can now see that, yes, there are some value that can be seen that government is doing this or doing that. In some other countries, for example, just briefly, and when I was in Ethiopia at the UN, you find that the price of crude, you go to buy fuel at a particular time, the price has changed in their local currency, the birr. And it changes. You're not sure what the price will be as you approach the fuel station. And the economy has been functioning well. So we need to be able to let government get out of this subsidy issue. Whatever it is, they should not accommodate any, because once you allow a little bit, it keeps on growing. And before you know it, you say, oh, we are now back to subsidy payment. Government should maintain this subsidy is gone mantra, which the president said that on inauguration, and make sure the economy runs properly on an efficient means, so that to be able to get the proper macroeconomic indicators the way they ought to be.
Well, Prof, one of the things we have seen in this budget proposal is that wage bill is going up. By the time you add wage bill and you add the cost for debt service, That's higher than the projected revenue. Where does that leave capital expenditure if they are spending more than half of the projection just to pay salaries? The wage bill alone is 3.7 trillion.
Yeah, okay. In my view, the wage bill should actually go higher than this because if I have my way, government should be able to cut down the service and increase wage bill because incomes are very, very low across the economy. And you need to stimulate consumer spending. Very, very important. And one area government is not working on, which I think I will give them a very, very poor mark, is in the area of cost of governance. Well, we're hearing about they are buying brand new jeeps for people in the National Assembly, which is costing about 130, 150 million naira for each legislator. And how much money was spent by the president on the last trip to New York? And when we hear some of these humongous figures, we find that government is not doing a lot in the area of cutting down on the cost of governance. That is the area. And the pegs to political office holders, they are living as if nothing is happening. It is the ordinary man who is bearing the brunt. Government needs to take a look at those areas, cut down on the pegs to political office holder, and then make sure you jack up the wage bill. The wage bill should go higher than cut down on your debt service slightly, and then make sure many staff members and many workers are actually living in penury. The level of poverty in the country has increased significantly. The average man the average worker is actually, what you are earning cannot take you home. It's like it takes to the bus stop, like people say, jokingly. So the wage bill needs to actually even go higher than it is currently. There's need for massive salary increase across the public sector. The salaries are very, very poor, very, very, and that creates room for corruption. Because when people cannot eat, they be able to begin to fritter away even the capital expenditure, like you mentioned. Government needs to spend and spend well. My problem with capital spending in Nigeria is the value for money, the efficiency of the expenditure. We have so many abandoned projects. So even if you have a small portion of the budget allocated for capital expenditure, we should make sure that we get value for money, and that has not been the case. So I think, number one, government needs to jack up the wage bill. Labor is waiting for government. If government does not perform, the country will be in some kind of chaos. So they should actually address workers. Workers are not well paid in Nigeria. If you now benchmark it in dollar terms, for example, a professor in the university earns less than $500 a month. That's crazy. So if you look at the wage bill, it is very, very low, and government needs to do something about that. Cut down on the cost of governance. Cut down on all these siren and all those specs of political office holders should be cut down, and they put more money in the wages of salary of workers. And then find out how you can manage the debt service so that you don't over squeeze people because you want to get out of debt, and manage how you take on new liabilities.
All right. So in terms of funding this 26 trillion naira budget, one of the assumptions that has been made is the assurances or perhaps prospects of investment, especially some of those secured in the first few weeks or months of this administration's tenure. We had celebrated the prospect of the Indian investment up to $14 billion, and this included investments in steel sector, petrochemical sector, and the likes. The president has traveled a number of times, and what the hope is that this will materialize to being, to getting concrete and actual investment and FDI. How confident, perhaps, are we in these assumptions that his many visits abroad would indeed bring or translate to investment and revenue for us as a nation? At this point, how confident are we? And it's important to keep note on this because it's not enough to make headlines with promises, but to see those promises become reality.
Yes, thank you very much. I'm also concerned about the source of funding of the budget. It is very critical. And if you take a look at our budget for the past, from 10 years and even beyond, the bulk of the money has always come from the oil sector. That is a major, and Nigeria depends primarily on one major product. If you look at taxation, money coming from taxation is about 12-13% of total, also including customs and excise and all that. So the bulk of the money that we use to fund the budget comes from the oil sector. So, and the issue of oil theft, like I had mentioned that before, it's a critical issue. However, all these investments, the plans, the promises, the engagements with the global investors, actually, in my view, could just be mere promises, because these people have agents here in the country. They know about the operating environment in Nigeria. It's not conducive. It's not conducive. How can capital come in? What will be the return on capital? How is the capital market like? How much fund is coming in? Even portfolio investment are coming to the country. People are skeptical. There's the issue of the country risk for every economy. When people are making investment, they look at the country risk. What are the issues in those economies? What is the return? What is the interest rate? What is the interest rate like in that economy? What is it like to have, in terms of the operating environment? Is it conducive? So when you hold meetings outside there and you have commitments, over the past time, how many of the commitments have materialized? Let's take a look at the past 4 or 5 years. How many of the commitments made by these global investors, how many of them have materialized? So in my view, the focus is not having too many of these meetings, traveling all over the world to engage investors. Put your house in order. If you put your house in order, capital will flow into your economy. That is how it's all over the world. What you do is to have a favorable domestic operating environment, which is not the case in Nigeria, in terms of the macroeconomic indicators, in terms of the security, in terms of infrastructure. When you put in, capital looks for returns all over, and capital will move. Capital, some firms have been shutting down in Nigeria, moving to Ghana, other countries. So we need to put our house in order. Yes, it's good to engage foreign investors, either from India or from Turkey or from America or from Germany, to invest in the oil sector, to invest in the power sector, wherever. But if you don't put your house in order, I think these meetings will just be like, they're just empty promises, and they may end up not materializing. Or if they materialize, it will just be in terms of marginally. Finally, capital flows in. When you talk about FDI flows in, like we said earlier, either it's looking for market, or it's looking for resource. It's resource seeking, market seeking, or efficiency seeking. Which FDI will come in? Are they looking for market? The market is there. Are they looking for efficiency? It's not there. Are they looking for resources? They flow into the oil sector, wherever they can make a return. Let us put our house in order. Prof. In my view, the environment needs to be improved on for us to actually have some gate in that area.
Hello, Prof. Please, I just want to answer this question quickly because of the want of time. I have some statistics here that tells us that in 1980, our recurrent expenditure was about 4.1 billion then, which was about 4.1 trillion now. Till date, over 40 years ago, the numbers in dollar terms have not still changed about our budget. So we've not had real development in that cycle. What can we really do to bring real development? If our recurring expenditure was 40 billion, was 4 billion then, which was about $4 billion then in 1980, till date, it's still about the same amount. Then what have we done to ourselves as a nation? Quickly, as we wrap up, about a minute.
Yes, quickly, I think the critical issue is about value for money. I've said that cost of governance, most of the time, they say we operate a very large bureaucracy, and we don't invest in the critical sectors. And most of the corruption is also a factor. We keep on staying at the same point, we keep on spending, and it's just like a jamboree. We don't see value because of leakages, because we don't prioritize properly the critical sectors. And then we have a lot of unfocused plans which don't bring us the desired development. That actually is our problem as a country over the years.
Very much, Professor Nwokoma, for joining us.